Good morning. Good morning. I'm Dr. Maiysha, and I am the founder of the Mind Remapping Academy. Um, Today, I want to talk a little bit about emotional honesty as a keystone, as a foundation for emotional intelligence, as some would call it, or I like to call it emotional flexibility or emotional fluency. And I want to talk about this because, a lot of the conversations that I have center around the topic of emotional intelligence and modeling this for um, our young, our youth, and also this as part of the healing process um, in our community. And so I want to start by just sharing a little bit personally. This has been the last few days has been tough because my family and I lost a very close person in our lives. Um, and, you know, one of the things, without, sharing too much detail on that, one of the things that I noticed in that loss, of course, in true Maiysha fashion, um, I go into observe mode. And for myself, um, historically, I default to thinking rather than feeling. So as I have been, processing and going through this process, this grief process, I noticed that when asked how I'm feeling, or even when asking myself how I'm feeling, because I've learned over the years to ask myself how am I feeling, because I tend to default to the mind, default to what I think. I noticed that what my mind wants to do is to go to the thinking. How do you feel? Well, I think. And it wants to go to the rationalization. How do you feel? Well, I know that. And my mind wants to go to the analytical, right? And what I noticed in my own process was the intention with which I had to stay in, allow myself to feel. And not only to feel, but to be honest about how I was feeling. And because I tend to live in my mind, admittedly, the it was what was challenging about being in the emotion and the feelings or acknowledging is to really be able to understand the swirl of feelings that was happening. And as I, connected with my family, they're up north and I'm down here in the south. As I connected with my family, um, there are these levels, these various levels of, emotional expression and emotional honesty that I noticed coming up. And so it, was what came to me was that, it's this emotional, well, emotion, when we talk about emotional intelligence, and I hesitate on calling it emotional intelligence, because what is intelligence? Intelligence is a construct um, that's created, and there are various boxes put around this this word intelligence. And so I tend to lean more into emotional fluency. And when we think about fluency, when we think about, language and fluency, first we need to be able to understand the language, recognize the language, right? Recognize what is the language. Begin to understand what language is being spoken, and then understand the words of the language so that we can then begin to identify words, identify sentences, identify patterns, and then speak the language, right? And so when we talk about emotional fluency, it's the same thing. Like the first thing to think about is this awareness of emotion and acceptance that it's there, right? And that speaks into emotional honesty, right? It's easy for people when people ask, "How are you doing?" for us to say, "Fine." That is the common. Um, that's the common like reflex answer. How are you doing? Fine. And so when we are being emotionally honest, we can we can actually begin to think about what are we feeling. I think, emotional awareness and acceptance that leads to that emotional honesty is what is the access to healing. It's the access to moving through emotional processes. And it is the access to expanding our capacity to be with the full range of emotions at any given time. Um, and so, one of the things that um, is a challenge for me, and not only myself, but so often I see with others, is identifying the emotion. And I like emotion wheels for that. And I believe there's an app, and I'm gonna look that up real quick. There's an app that was shared with me, and it is called How I'm Feeling, if I'm remembering correctly. And so it's a useful, very useful app. I think there was another related app um, that was shared with me as well called Mood Meter, but I think this particular app is called How I'm Feeling. I'm still looking for it, but that app can be easily downloaded um, on your platform. And so, just identifying the emotion is, I think, the first step. Like, what is the emotion? And sometimes, especially when you've experienced a level of trauma, when you've experienced a level of loss, um, when you've even experienced a violation of values, there can be multiple emotions that happen at one time. Um, there can be sadness, there can be confusion, there can be anger, there can be numbness, there can be um, guilt, there can be a multitude of what I like to call a swirl of emotions that happen. And I think that it's important for us to acknowledge the swirl. I think sometimes when we can't pin down one emotion, then one of two things can happen. We could just just push it down and push it away, which I think initially, especially for people who are as analytical as I am, it's the easier thing to do at first, is to push it down and push it away. However, um, the more challenging thing is to sit with it and begin to tease out, well, what are the various emotions that are there? So when we do that, um, it gives us some release. It allows us some release. Now, I will say something else about emotions and emotional fluency and capacity for being in our emotions is that it's uncomfortable sometimes. It's uncomfortable a lot of the times when the emotions are negative emotions. And for some, when the emotions are too positive, it can be uncomfortable. However, learning to sit inside of the discomfort again is an access to healing. So when we are refusing to acknowledge or be honest about our emotions, um, what is happening is that we are avoiding emotions and delaying the inevitable, which is that when you push away emotions for a period of time, that stuff doesn't go away. It manifests. It'll either come out in an explosion, or it'll implode, or it will manifest in physical symptoms. And so, um, while uncomfortable, that being willing to feel the emotions, the analytical, and I'm saying this as somewhat as a person who experiences this. I know that the being in the analytical, the defaulting to when asked how are you feeling, or when asking yourself how are you feeling, the defaulting to the thinking is a way to avoid the feeling. And um, and then that doesn't really give us access to the healing, to the moving through. um, Another way that we sometimes avoid is by keeping ourselves busy. And I was having a conversation with my dad about stillness, and how you know the discomfort of feeling sometimes manifest in me becoming restless and wanting to move and wanting to clean and wanting to this restless in the body. Because not only it's the when you have this um, experience of loss, of trauma, of a violation of values, whichever bucket that lands in, and the brain kicks up in the emotion, and the nervous system is impacted. And so inside of that, there's either agitation, which can manifest in physical agitation, and it looks like different things. And so the value of um, stillness, allowing ourselves stillness, brings the opportunity for catharsis, brings the opportunity for emotional release, which again cannot be very uncomfortable. And also, I believe, necessary for the access to healing. So I talk about this, emotional fluency, emotional awareness, and part of the emotional expression is whether it be the catharsis or the emoting itself, or whether it be the vocalization, the talking through, the talking, talking about how you feel as a starting point, that emotional honesty, um, and then the willingness to then move into the what some would call emotional literacy, which is using the words to describe the emotion, can lead us to connect and to dialogue. And for some, emotion needs to be processed inward first, and then felt and emoted, and then can be talked about. So there's no right way to do this, right? For some, emotion comes and needs to be processed quietly, and then before the emoting can happen, or maybe the emoting in the quiet space is the same, and then it can be talked about. However, the more we um, allow ourselves to connect, because I think that is what's important, is that when we are experiencing loss, or the trauma, or like any type of trauma, whether it's an acute trauma or ongoing repetitive trauma, or if it's in the bucket of the violation of values, which also presents can is a traumatic experience as well. All of those are traumatic experiences. I just sort of broke them down into three buckets of trauma, and there are multiple buckets. I'm just talking about the few that that are coming to mind at the moment. Um, when we experience trauma, the thing that helps that to process through in a healthy way is to connect with others. And I know for some it is more comfortable to isolate. It's more comfortable, it's more familiar to go inward and to isolate and to be quiet and to be alone. And maybe for initially that might be what is needed, and ultimately to connect uh, is what allows the healing. To connect and move through those emotional processes honestly and with others is what helps us to um, move through, and also expands our own emotional fluency as we're connecting with others, and sharing that energy back and forth with others. It expands our own capacity to express what's going on and to identify what's going on. And that's why, that's one of the reasons why the healing can begin to occur, because that connection, not only is that connection just necessary to calm the nervous system, which is another reason I think connection helps to disseminate some of the impact of trauma, that connection. But it also um, gives us access to new language, verbal and nonverbal, with which to express um, the emotion that we're experiencing and the emotion that we're feeling. And so the emotional honesty is not in isolation, although it can start there. It is most powerful in community, in dialogue. And let me be clear, words are only 7% of communication. So that um, that communication or that connection is verbal, but it can also be nonverbal, in the breath, in physical touch, in just sitting together in silence, in the listening of others. And so, um, the last thing I'll begin to say about this is that, I talk a lot about legacy and what we're teaching our kids. What we do, our children, our youth, our young people are watching. And we, whether we are aware of it, want to or not, are modeling. We're modeling behavior. And so when we model this emotional fluency with our children, and it's not always easy, when we model this with our kids, it actually teaches them and gives them access to emotional fluency and emotional expression. And again, that emotional expression in our kids, when we model that it's okay, when we model um, that when we normalize emotion, when we normalize feeling emotions is part of the experience. When we model emotional expression, expressing emotion is part of the experience of life, and that we make it okay to express and talk about. And I think some kids, younger kids, don't realize that grown-ups have big feelings too, right? Grown-ups have big feelings too. And sometimes we try to hide our emotions, hide our big feelings, especially when they're feelings of sadness. And even when they're feelings of anxiety, we try to hide that from our kids. And that is the last thing that we should do. Now, how we how we express our emotions, how we model it, can be just as much of a lesson to ourselves and our kids as and how we even talk about it, um, as anything. And so, you know, during this time, this difficult time for myself and my family, me having my son with me, I have had to be honest with him about, how I'm feeling at any given moment. And my son is 8. And so he can understand these things. He may not be fully processing, and he doesn't need to necessarily fully process it, but he can understand it. He can understand it intuitively. And we can communicate um, inside of that fluency and that honesty. And what that does is that allows him to see that, even mommy at almost 48 has big feelings, has sad feelings, has anxious feelings, has frustrated feelings, has all the whole range of feelings outside of happiness and madness, which is what his his initial, as a young person, happy, sad, mad are you know, the main emotions in the lexicon, and we begin to tease those out and chunk them down a little more granularly, into the range or the spectrum of emotions felt, right? The spectrum of sadness, the spectrum of happiness, the spectrum of excitedness, the spectrum of anger, the spectrum of hurt, the spectrum of all of these various emotions that come up, the spectrum of fear, right? They're all spectrums. And the more we are able to tease out and identify and allow ourselves to feel and be honest with ourselves and connect with others, the more we can begin to explore and expand um, the emotional lexicon, the emotional fluency. And I think the more that we do that and connect with others and be in communication and in verbal and nonverbal dialogue, the deeper the healing can go. And so I that's what I wanted to share today. And I want to invite you to, of course, comment and share your experience of connecting and how the experience of um, emotional identification, awareness, and honesty, emotional expression occurs for you. How does that occur for you? How do you connect with others in those moments so that you can deepen the healing? Um, and I'd love to hear from you, of course. Um, and I also want you to go into your own life and contemplate this and think about, where are you? Who are the people in your life you feel safe to connect with? And it's something I didn't talk about, emotional safety, which perhaps I will bring into the next session, because guess what? I think that a huge part of being able to be emotionally honest is to have people in your life you feel emotionally safe with. And when you have those people in your life that you feel emotionally safe with, and when you can be a person who is emotionally safe, then it again allows for the connection. It allows for the healing. So, who in your life do you feel safe with to be emotionally honest? Who are you modeling emotional fluency? And by the way, our children can model that that emotional fluency for us too, because guess what? They don't have all of the stops and the internal conversations yet around suppressing emotions. They don't have that. So our young children can be our teachers. They can be our models for emotional honesty, right? So who are those models for you? What are the structures? What are support the support structures? What's the setup that you have to help you, to support you in your emotional fluency and your emotional journey and your emotional flexibility journey, right? And I'll ask you, because it's such an important topic, to share this. Share this episode with another person in your life who may be in need of hearing this message, with a family member, with a friend, with a colleague. Um, just share this with someone. And if you, of course, you know, want to continue in these conversations with me, then it's easy to subscribe, and so that you can know when the next conversation like this is coming up, because these are the kind of conversations. This is what this is why I do this. This is why I have the podcast, to be able to tackle life's daily challenges and opportunities, and to plant new seeds that expand our fluency, our listening, and our ability to communicate and connect with others. So go apply this in whatever way that you can see that you can apply it. And, you know, just want to remind you that you all listeners, are the bridge to the next generation of empowered, emotionally fluent, resilient leaders in our world. And if we are going to dismantle some of the systems of oppression that are in um, our sphere, then we need you as a bridge to a new future. And so thank you for listening. As always, without the listeners, there is no podcast. And of course, if you want to know, how to continue to expand your thought fluency, or your emotional fluency, and your psychological flexibility, you can reach out to me. Go to remapmymind.com. Take a look at what opportunities there are to train with me on this. Or if you want to do some one-on-one work, that is available as well. So with that, I will say thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Namaste.